Well, let's start then. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Well, good afternoon to some of you too. Thank you for joining us today in this Marine Biodiversity Networking Friday that was organized by the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, EMBOM, and the Earth Center. I have the pleasure to moderate this session. My name is Claudia Barón Aguilar. I'm a PhD student at the University of South Florida in the Marine Remote Sensing Lab. During this session, we're gonna focus on ocean observation. And for that, we will have presentations on essential ocean variables within the context of a global ocean observing system. And the idea is to facilitate connections and strengthen collaborations among the Marine Biodiversity Ocean Decade actions. Before getting into the agenda and introducing our speakers, I want to tell you that all of them have impressive bios, so I encourage you to visit the webpage of the Earth Center to read their complete bios. But well, I'm going to try to keep moving that now. But for the first 20 minutes, we have Dr. Gabrielle Canonico from NOAA, and she worked jointly with Karen Evans from CSIRO, the Oceans at Atmosphere. They will talk to us about the Global Ocean Observing System for Marine Life. Dr. Canonico is a member of the EOS Integrated Ocean Observing System program, which is housed in NOAA. She led also the development of EMBOM in 2013, and she serves as a co-lead of Marine Life 2030 Decade program. Then Dr. Evans is the principal research scientist and team leader with CSIRO, Oceans at Atmosphere. After their intervention, we'll follow with the Ocean Decade Action Showcase. And for that, we have 4 speakers, and each of them will have 5 minutes to present. First, we'll have Cristian Muñoz with the OceanPractices for the decade. Cristian is a senior engineer in the Institute of Marine Research in Norway, and he is currently involved in the UNESCO IOOS Ocean Best Practices System Steering Group. Then we'll have the pleasure to listen to Dr. Margaret Leinen from OBON, the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network. Professor Margaret is the Director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Vice Chancellor for Marine Science of the University of California at San Diego. She currently serves as a member co-chair of the Decade Advisory Board for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Our third speaker is going to be Leen Vandepitte from ABC Worms Above and Beyond. Leen is a marine biologist with a master's in biology and a master's in marine and lacustrine sciences from the University of Ghent. She is a project manager in the data center division of the Flanders Marine Institute, where she is running the Marine Life Plus program. And to close our showcase, we're gonna have Ana Hilario from Challenger 150. Ana is a deep sea biologist at the Center for Environment and Marine Studies of University of Aveiro. She currently co-leads the UN Decade program Challenger 150. That's gonna close our showcase, and at the end of the presentations, we'll have time for discussions. So if you have any questions, we're gonna save them for the end. I do have to ask you to please pose your questions under the questions and answers instead of the chat, okay? So let's start with Gabrielle.
Thank you, Claudia. And thank you to the Air Center for hosting us. It's so nice to see so many of us in the community coming together today. I appreciate the opportunity to join the EMBON Networking Fridays, and I'm going to talk about the Global Ocean Observing System, which many of you will be familiar with. But in particular, talking about efforts to advance a global observing system for marine life. And I think Joanna was going to share my slides, but I don't see them. Do you, Claudia? I'd see them now, maybe. Okay. Thank you. So I'm speaking today in my role as co-chair of the GOOS Biology and Ecosystem Panel, a role that I share with Karen Evans from CSIRO, who Claudia introduced. And so I'm going to speak on behalf of both of us. Next slide, please. In 2019, GOOS launched its 2030 strategy, which focuses on delivering ocean information across operational services and on ocean climate and ocean health. The strategy aims to build a GOOS that is responding to society's increasing needs for ocean data and knowledge for sustainable development. So very relevant to the topic of the Ocean Decade here today. As a GOOS community, we have a mandate to consider how to strengthen integration of biology and ecosystem observations across the global system. And you can see this in the GOOS strategy, which is available online. It's also reflected in the many conversations we're having about how to implement that strategy. Other drivers for this focus include the Ocean Decade, but also global conventions such as the Convention on Biological Diversity and high-level conversations about global climate, all of which include a focus on impacts of global change on critical living resources. So what does it mean to integrate biology across GOOS? For us, it means working together within the GOOS community and also with other networks to recognize those groups that are monitoring and collecting biology and ecosystem observations, and also being intentional in how we integrate biology into new observing activities, how we document best practices for ocean observing, develop products with and for users with an emphasis on the with users, reporting on the global observing system, interacting with modelers, observing practitioners, and other stakeholder communities. Next slide, please. The Biology and Ecosystem, or Bioeco Panel, as we call it, is one of 3 expert panels of GOOS that help to coordinate ocean observations by defining and supporting data collection for essential ocean variables. We work closely with the other GOOS panels, which focus on physics and climate and also biogeochemistry. Next slide, please. The Bioeco Panel is focused on defining and supporting data collection for biology and ecosystem EOVs, which were identified through an extensive review of societal needs as reflected in more than 20 international conventions and multilateral agreements relevant for marine life. The review also looked at the state of ocean observations measured by over 100 observing programs and the impact, feasibility, and scalability of these variables, and also how they contribute to and address societal and scientific questions. The bioeco EOVs represent functional groups as well as biogenic habitats. Each EOV has an expert champion, in some cases more than one, who leads the development of specification sheets to help guide implementation of that EOV. There is ongoing work on a number of these variables. I won't be exhaustive in speaking about them, but to develop specification sheets and the implementation plans that I mentioned for each EOV, expert teams typically meet in workshops. They could be regional or global in nature. In those workshops, they'll talk about data sources, review methods, and plan next steps towards global monitoring and mapping efforts, and then document those. These regional and global communities have been active in coordinating around monitoring and mapping for macroalgae and seagrasses. Discussions have begun around deep ocean invertebrates and engaging the deep ocean community on biology and ecosystem EOVs. The coral EOV team has identified a plan towards a common global strategy for coral reef monitoring and for reporting that includes adoption of EOVs as well as the Group on Earth Observations Essential Biodiversity Variable Framework as priorities for understanding and reporting on the health of coral reefs. They're also considering mechanisms to improve and expand delivery of those variables, which is common across all of the EOVs, the consideration of how to share the information that is generated. An emerging EOV is ocean sound. We've made a note of that here on the slide. This one is recognized as a cross-cutting topic that supports multiple GOOS panels. And there's an international team led by the International Quiet Ocean Experiment and with support from SCORE that's developing an implementation plan for the Ocean Sound EOV that will be ready for community review. So those are just a few examples. Like I said, that is not an exhaustive representation, but why is a focused effort on which biology and ecosystem variables to collect, what methods to use, and how to handle and share the data so needed? Next slide, please. In 2019, with funding from the Pegasus Program for Early Stage Grants Advancing Sustainability Science, Bioeco Panel members and partners developed an inventory and a gap analysis of active long-term, and in that case, long-term is defined as 5 or more years old, marine biodiversity observing programs globally to better understand who's collecting in situ long-term marine biological data, whether the data are accessible and interoperable, and where the data are going if, in fact, they are reusable. The group surveyed 203 active long-term programs that systematically sample 1 or more of the Bioeco EOVs. The survey revealed that only 7% of the ocean surface had an active monitoring program capturing these variables. So given high societal relevance that we've talked about and significant gaps in our coverage of biology as a global observing system, a priority for the panel is to support expanded collection of biology and ecosystem observations and ensure the wide accessibility to those data that are being generated. As a complement to the expanded collection of bioeco observations, which has been a focus of the panel, building awareness of monitoring activities and ensuring access to the data is also a priority. Next slide, please. The GOOS Bioeco portal aims to provide open access metadata and information on global ocean observations for marine life and monitoring programs involving biological and ecosystem EOVs, and ultimately to provide insight into the current and historical state and trends of ocean observations for marine life. On the right in this slide is a screenshot of what the main interface of the portal looks like, with the map on the right and filterable EOVs and other metadata information on the 579 networks represented here, that's on the left. The portal is currently still under development and has not been launched to the public, but in its current state, it does contain the metadata of those 579 globally distributed active monitoring programs. The use, purpose, and functionality of the portal is undergoing beta testing by selected demonstrator programs that will guide development of the portal and the metadata it holds. There is interest in including data beyond EOV metadata into the portal, and the team is looking into integration of other EOV subvariables and essential biodiversity variable related data into the portal. The metadata in the portal will be extractable and could be filtered for storytelling purposes regarding the state of global ocean observations, speaking to that question of reuse of available data. Next slide, please. An analysis of the portal by OBOS indicated that 94% of the total number of networks represented in the portal are active, though that may not account for changes in the face of COVID. Some networks observe and provide metadata for multiple EOVs. This table provides an overview of the EOV metadata that's already captured in the portal. The most extensively monitored EOV captured is plankton, and that includes phytoplankton and zooplankton, while the least monitored is mangroves. Fish and marine mammal monitoring has the highest percent of networks still active and reporting through the portal. We do have work to do to further populate the portal, but we're excited to have this platform available as a resource for all of you to help visualize and track the status of bioeco monitoring globally. Next slide, please. So the Pegasus project that I mentioned provided important context and input from the observing community for the Bioeco panel to build on. This slide offers just a sample, again, of additional panel efforts to expand global collection of, and also awareness and coordination of the Bioeco EOVs. Panel members continue to engage with the community through workshops and working groups, such as those supported by SCORE. In the case right now of a couple of active efforts around seagrass and one just starting around fish visual census techniques. Those are 2 examples. I also mentioned SCORE's support of the ocean sound variable previously in my remarks. Also, regional sponsors are supporting development of EOVs. In the case of EuroSea, looking at seagrass and macroalgae monitoring in Europe, and in the United States, a focus on coordination of marine mammal and coral EOV methods and data. EuroSea funding did support a deeper analysis of the state of seagrass and macroalgae observing in Europe, but those efforts we also consider as supporting the development of global EOV progress and documentation, as an example. The Bioeco Panel welcomes opportunities to be at the table for development of regional observing systems or to join other fora interested in jointly developing implementation plans and data sharing strategies for specific EOVs. And that can happen through these regional efforts that I mentioned or other fora. But the panel has also prioritized contributing across the programs of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which is a theme that brings us all together here today. Panel members are actively leading or contributing to a number of decade programs with an interest in expanding or otherwise addressing observations of marine life. And some of those are listed here. This is probably not an exhaustive list again. Marine Life 2030 is one example of a decade program that the community you have gathered here today is helping to build, but we're going to hear from others as well, as you've heard in the introductions. Next slide, please. And for the part of GOOS, GOOS has put a substantial effort into planning and consulting the community on development of several programs for the Ocean Decade. These proposals are summarized here in this slide, but they hinge on a common theme of integration across GOOS and with users and stakeholders to link observations of the open and coastal ocean, to connect with communities of stakeholders globally, and to build processes, infrastructures, and tools towards integration of the system, which includes integration across those three expert panels, for example, but also integration on modeling, data sharing, and other priorities. The planning process to implement these programs has already deepened observing cooperation with the data system, forecasting systems, and some stakeholders, but GOOS is poised to expand that coordination as the programs mature and the decade progresses. So these are early days, and there's an open invitation for engagement in any of these programs. Next slide, please. So what's next is that we forge ahead and that we think about how to do that together. We need better information about marine life status and trends in the face of global change. We know that, but significant gaps remain in our understanding and in the information we have to support that understanding. Sharing methods and best practices for science and observation, supporting wider distribution of low-cost technologies, ensuring open and equitable sharing of data, and expanding capacity building and training are steps we must all take, but together. The Bioeco Panel will continue efforts to advance integration of biology across all components and projects of GOOS, and to be intentional about linking marine life experts, networks, and users into that activity with OBON and OBOS and other groups represented here. We are keen to leverage and complement other efforts, for example, on data management and visualization, identifying biological observations needed for climate and ecosystem models, and bringing marine life into regular reporting on the state of our global ocean observing activities. So many of our efforts are interlinked, and we all have a role to play. GOOS thinks a lot about requirements and user needs. OBON is focused on coordination of observations and partners, among other things. OBOS is emphasizing open data sharing and integration. All of us have a responsibility to contribute to ocean best practices. Not to mention, we need to link with those communities that we will rely on for co-development of science and information, the communities that have a critical need for marine life understanding to support resource assessments, management, sustainable development, and really livelihoods. So I hope we can all work together to implement actions over the ocean decade and beyond that to advance our understanding of marine life. And again, I appreciate the time today, and I'm glad that we're going to hear in more detail about some of the other programs that I just so briefly might have mentioned. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Gabrielle. Now we will follow with the showcase, with the Ocean Decade Actions showcase, and we'll start with you, Cristian.
Hi, hello. I'm gonna share my screen. I hope I can. I should. Just a second. Let's see. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes. It's
Perfect. No, not sharing. Come on. Sorry, it's slideshow. Yeah. All right. Well, the Ocean Practices is a decade program led by the Ocean Best Practices System, OBPS. Just as a refresh for those who don't know, OBPS was established in 2017 and is currently operated under the umbrella of IOC and GOOS. OBPS is a global system comprising technological solutions and also community approaches with the aim to enhance the management of methods, but as well to support the development of best practices. The system is composed by 5 major elements, sort of speaking. 2 of them, the most important to me, are the users and, of course, the contributors, to who we provide support and facilitate outreach activities for them. But apart from that, we have 3 major elements around that. There is the OBPS repository, which is a digital repository hosted by IOD, where we, of course, have all the methods and best practices archived. We have a peer review theme in Frontiers in Marine Science. And also we have capacity development and training capabilities supported by the IOD Ocean Teacher Global Academy. It is important always to remember or remind the definition of best practices that we are using. And in particular, well, this definition has 2 terms. In particular, I would like to highlight the second term, where the adoption by multiple organizations is a challenge without the collaboration. And here is where best practices may become very, very beneficial, because the best practices development may establish a framework for collaborative opportunities. And of course, within the decade context, using best practices becomes very beneficial also for building trust, promoting equitable science, and providing a foundation across ocean decade programs, promoting interoperability. And here I highlight interoperability because this is a very strong requirement, considering the nature or the context where the decade is moving with the multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary nature now. So again, best practices, we are fully convinced that they will improve such interoperability. And so this is why we support all our ocean stakeholders in securing, sharing, and collectively advancing in this field of producing best practices. So how we want to do this in the context of the decade? Well, we are enabling the development, adoption, and continuous evolution of context-based methodologies into best practices. At the same time that we are trying to accelerate the convergence and co-development of methodologies into a trusted system that is that will be fully compliant with the fair and care principles. And last but not least, what we aim is to facilitate the creation of a federated network of complementary methodology management systems, because we understand we are not the only one that are dedicated to this, and depending on the sector, on the discipline, there might be others around. So we would like really to connect, to join with them and to facilitate this integration. And last but not least, fostering a community-led capacity development in ocean best practices. And we believe that with all these elements, we then will be able to enable equitable access to information, technology, and knowledge, and then facilitate more ocean science that is fit for purpose. So, and community here, it's a key concept, because it is a community that will transform this vision into a reality. So we need you guys to make this happen. And how? Well, again, in the context of the decade, we have several ways where the different stakeholders, communities, and organizations could get involved in this. So, for example, actively participating and improving our overarching framework to incentivize the communities to converge the methodological knowledge into context-dependent best practices. This is already occurring. We have a community forum, we have our workshops, we have this playground to facilitate these interactions within the communities, but also supporting the co-design of this federated network that I was mentioning before, or establishing primary points of contact in relation to the creation, review, and dissemination of best practices, and of course, associated development and provision of training and capacity development. And last but not least, another way to contribute can be undertaking pilot activities with us for better understanding and assessing the functioning of the program operations and services. And of course, that would help us a lot to guide the improvements that the system requires. So yeah, that's basically in a nutshell, because in 5 minutes it's complex to go through all the details, but I leave you here the points of contact, email and website address, just in case you need more information or you want to get involved with us, which we very much look forward to it. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, Cristian. Now we're going to have sharing. Yes, please. Now we're going to have Dr. Margaret Leinen.
Thank you.
Can you share your screen, please?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble getting it to share.
We all have that problem.
Let's try again. There we go.
There you go.
There we go. Great, thank you. I'm going to be telling you about the Ocean Biomolecular Observing Network today. So this is an endorsed program of the UN Decade, and it is led by, or the lead institution is POGO, the Partnership for Observation of the Global Ocean. And the program originated from a workshop that was held in 2019 between scientists and user groups, and was discussing the development of various biomolecular techniques for examining biodiversity and for looking at other ecosystem issues. And the outcome of that workshop was the proposal for the OBON network. It's based on the idea that, as all of you know, every organism in the ocean is made up of biomolecules, and those biomolecules are released into the ocean either through metabolic waste, through shedding of cells, or when the organism dies. So by analyzing either the tissue of the organisms, the water that they've been in, or the sediment that they've been in, we can see the trace of those organisms. And in that way, look at the biodiversity of the ocean in a very complete way. OBON has a number of partners that are universities and research institutes, but also several nonprofit organizations, even a couple of corporations, and there are 38 nations represented so far in OBON. This is the OBON Interim Science Advisory Committee, and several of these people are on the call today. And we are in the process right now of evaluating project proposals that have come in from the last UN Decade call. So we received 11 project proposals, and we'll be looking at those for their applicability to being part of OBON. Our objectives are first to build a coastal to open ocean multi-omics biodiversity observing system and to develop autonomous sampling and analytical capability for that system. We also want to enhance marine omics data systems and ecosystem models by adding biomolecular components. We also want to, as we did at the beginning, partner with marine conservation and management specialists, policymakers, private sector, and so forth to address sustainable development goals. And then finally, to develop and transfer capacity through training programs combined with funded equipment programs supported by development aid agencies and philanthropy. So in talking about our objectives, we want to build this coastal to open ocean multi-omics biodiversity system and develop autonomous sampling. So our initial work is to include biomolecular analysis in long-term observing systems. For example, the continuous plankton recorder system, CalCoffee, that's the California Cooperative Oceanic Fisheries Investigation, and the new EcoBond program of the EU, and then to add new projects proposed through the UN Ocean Decade. We also want to foster further development of eDNA methods. So these have received a lot of attention. We've seen some very intriguing studies using eDNA, and we saw a lot of indication that people are putting a lot of effort into, for example, developing ideas about quantification of the number of organisms or the mass of organisms through use of eDNA. We saw a couple of very interesting presentations on fish stock assessment. We also saw some other presentations on use of eDNA for other quantitative purposes. So there's a lot of work to be done with this methodology, and through OBON, we hope to foster that development. We certainly also want to foster development of new technology. So these are illustrations of some of the available technology for collecting samples, whether those are on moorings, whether those are from autonomous vehicles, or whether they're other kinds of conventional sampling. So our stretch goal for the decade is that by the end of the decade, we would routinely be sampling for biomolecular components from a wide variety of platforms, but also that we would be starting to have platforms that would not only sample, but also analyze at sea and send back data instead of samples. So we're very interested in fostering technology development. We also want to enhance marine omics data systems and be able to get those into ecosystem models by adding biomolecular components. And this illustration shows the way that we're looking at that. And Pierre Buttigieg, who's on the call, could probably discuss this much more clearly than I can. But what we're really focused on is developing a digital exchange package that would allow OBON observations that are put into the package to easily be able to interact with INSDC, OBOS, to find records there, to also interact with oceanographic data and make those interoperable so that they much more easily fit into synthesis efforts, into efforts like DITO, the Digital Ocean Twin, and other efforts that would provide context for the OBON data. Then, as I said, we are looking to partner with marine conservation and management specialists, with policymakers, the private sector, and have begun conversations in several regions with those specialists and policymakers. But we're also hoping that organizations like MBON, like the other networks that are developing, will help all of us in this biological area interact more effectively with people in the user community, and bring us together to make sure that we design our projects in ways that are really going to provide the data that these groups need. And then, as I said, we're interested in developing and transferring capacity through training programs and funded equipment programs. And as an example, we're working with and looking to Atlantico's Mission Microbiomes expedition to use it as a pilot for capacity building, and to see what is learned from their capacity building efforts. So they partnered with especially South Africa and Brazil to bring them into this Atlantico Mission Microbiomes expedition, and use it as an opportunity for incorporating them into the research, and also using it as a training platform. So how can you work with us? A new call for actions will come out in April and every 6 months following. And for those of you that have efforts that are complementary or that you think are appropriate for OBON, we invite you to submit those as actions for OBON with the next call. And in terms of affiliating with OBON, I think that the value added for people is to connect to others that are working on biomolecular analysis around the world and really be up to speed on developments. We intend to sponsor workshops and other conferences that are on particular topics like technology development, like the data architecture and exchange system. And you'd be able to partner in this data system and use its tools for interoperability. So you can also help us. We have a call out for nomination of individuals for the Science Advisory Committee and the User Advisory Committee, and also connect us with scientists and environmental managers in your area who are interested in using biomolecular tools. And you can contact us. We have a Twitter feed that is very active, and you can contact us through the web or contact me directly. So thanks very much for that. And I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Margaret. Now we will listen to Leen from ABC Worms. So if you can please share your screen. Hi, Leen.
Thank you. There we go. That should be sharing. Okay. I'll tell you a little bit about Worms as an endorsed project with the title Above and Beyond, Completing the World Register of Marine Species, or just ABC Worms in short. Yes. Worms itself is an authoritative classification and catalog of marine names, and it's managed by a wide variety of experts. It aims to provide a list of names of marine organisms that include information on synonymy, so it can serve as a guide to have an interpretation for taxonomic literature. Now, Worms did not start right away as a world register. It goes back to 2004, where it started as a European register, and then from there on, it grew into a world register, an online register of marine species. Now, Worms itself is not just a name index, but it's expert-based taxonomic database. It's governed on different levels, and first and foremost, it relies on countless voluntary contributions of almost 300 marine-oriented editors who form the editorial boards. And then there's also a Worms steering committee that represents the members of the editorial board in all the matters that relate to the database. And then there's also the data management team, the team that keeps the database online and that supports the editors and the user community. WORMS itself has a permanent home at the Flanders Marine Institute in Belgium. And WORMS itself is web-based, which means that it has many online functionalities and web services. And as a user or an editor, you only need access to the internet to consult or edit it. And because it is web-based, a lot of all the information that gets added is also immediately visible online. Now, when the decade was launched, the steering committee and the data management team decided to aim for an endorsement of WORMS. And the general decade vision implies that we have an excellent knowledge of what lives in the ocean. And as all marine biological science is somehow linked to the core knowledge and the correct usage of taxonomy, WORMS can be seen as a scientific means to unambiguously name all the marine species and to ensure that all existing names are thoroughly documented and linked to their valid name. In October 21, WORMS was endorsed as a decade project action. And as part of, I mean, it might seem that a register of marine organism names is a small implicit part in the decade mission, but still it's indispensable and it's fundamental in linking numerous other initiatives. Upon endorsement, WORMS was linked to the action program Marine Life 2030, and both Marine Life 2030 and WORMS link to the Sustainable Development Goals 14 and 13, but mostly 14, the life below water, because in order to be able to protect, conserve, and manage marine life, the knowledge of which species are encountered below the surface of the oceans and seas and their characteristics, it's critical to our ability to define their potential as a resource, their potential threats, and also to develop means to protect and sustainably manage them. And also when looking at the distribution of marine life, one needs to be able to correctly name a species, and linking a species and its characteristics to its distribution can also give valuable insights on how a species is affected by its surroundings. Now, for example, knowing which species have a calcified skeleton is highly relevant in any research that is linked to climate change and ocean acidification. And WORMS provides a global marine species register, which links between old and new names for species. And it also includes a platform for the documentation of relevant traits or characteristics. Now, there are several high-level objectives that have been defined for WORMS within the decades. And a first goal is to provide a complete database of marine taxon names by targeting the currently identified priorities and gaps and documenting the relationship between existing names and linking each name to the supporting taxonomic literature. WORMS also serves as a data rescue platform for taxonomy-focused databases that are at the brink of disappearing. And by offering WORMS as a rescue platform, we can safeguard expert knowledge and make it widely and publicly available. The WORMS community will also develop strategies and guidelines to consistently deal with well-established temporary names and open taxonomic nomenclature, as this kind of information is being used more frequently by the taxonomic community, and it can no longer be ignored in taxonomic databases. The documentation of species traits, which are of critical importance for ecological marine research, will also be encouraged. And we will also provide support and links between other global databases and infrastructure that use a marine taxonomic backbone, for example, OBOS and GOOS, as well as improved content and stronger relationships with initiatives and infrastructures such as Catalog of Life, Barcode of Life, and GenBank. We will also aim to widen the user group of WORMS, and we will target all groups of what is called the quadruple helix. So we're looking at scientists, policymakers, industry, and the public at large, so that all can make use of and benefit from WORMS and its supporting network. Now, WORMS is an international service. It's driven by its editorial board, steering committee, and data management team. And it's making sure that an authoritative and quality controlled register can be offered to its user groups. It's freely accessible for all. The majority of the content is under Creative Commons licenses. And we do not only offer our content through the website, but also through web services, which allows an easy machine-to-machine communication. Overall, WORMS is being used as a quality control tool already by many people, institutes, projects, and initiatives to verify, for example, the use taxonomy in their own lists and databases. And there's also other global registers that are offering their content to WORMS so that WORMS can become more complete. Now, so far, I've talked about what WORMS can do for you, but there's also things that you can do for WORMS to help us to become more complete. As mentioned earlier, WORMS is a dynamic system, and as any major online database, WORMS is not complete. And in order to become more complete, your feedback as a user is indispensable, because only that way we're able to fill certain gaps and identify certain errors. So please don't hesitate to point out possible shortcomings or errors that we have in the content, and also acknowledge your usage of WORMS. Any contribution that you make to WORMS is also a contribution to Marine Life 2030 and the decade in general. Now, if you have any questions or want to provide feedback, there's only one address, that's info@marinespecies.org, where you can get in touch with us. And we're very much looking forward to anything that the decade might bring and how we can potentially collaborate with all the amazing initiatives that are already out there. And there's the old expression, all roads lead to Rome, and we hope, we dream that maybe someday, figuratively speaking, that will also become applicable to WORMS, in the sense that everything that's related to marine taxonomy finds its way to WORMS somehow, some way. Thank you.
Thank you, Leen. Leen, can you put the email the address in the chat, please?
I will, no problem.
Yeah. So now we have Ana Hilario.
I'm sorry. Is this working, Claudia?
It is.
Yes, okay, all right. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present Challenger 150. Challenger 150 is an endorsed program of the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And the leading institution is DOSI, the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, and it has received initial funds from SCORE. And although Challenger 150 is co-led by myself and Kerry Arwell in the University of Plymouth, this is a truly collaborative effort, and that's really the first message I want to convey here. As of the moment, Challenger counts with the participation of around 150 deep sea scientists from over 70 partner institutions from 25 countries around the globe, and that have so far secured funds for more or less a bit more than 30 research cruises. And these cruises are aligned with the objectives of the program, that in turn are aligned with the objectives of the decade, that, as you know, are to build capacity and to share knowledge, to generate data and to increase the use of ocean knowledge. In the case of Challenger 150, truly dedicated to the deep ocean. So in a nutshell, Challenger is a global cooperative devoted to delivering the science we need to sustainably manage the deep ocean. And it's also a vehicle for coordination of deep sea biological research towards a common set of objectives that, as I said, were predefined by the Decade of Ocean Science. And the way the program is realized is through individual research projects that, committing to align with the program, become a piece in a larger global jigsaw puzzle. As several people already said here during the afternoon, an important aspect of the Ocean Decade is that science and its results are co-designed and co-delivered, and that is really to ensure that the science is meeting the user need. And to this end, Challenger 150 is organized in regional scientific research working groups that are based on ocean basins and ecological knowledge, and that bring together scientists from the region, but also scientists working in the region and relevant regional stakeholders. And the aim of these working groups is to ensure that there's a good communication locally and what research is being carried out, and that research actually meets the regional needs. 12 regional scientific working groups have been established, and this was done after consultation with the deep sea biology community. And these are the Arctic, North Atlantic, Central and South Atlantic, Western Tropical Atlantic, the Northeast Pacific, Central Pacific, Southeast Pacific, Antarctic, Southwest Pacific, Indian Ocean, Northeast Pacific, and also the Mediterranean. And each of these working group is co-chaired by one senior scientist, but also by one early career researcher. And these chair positions rotate every 2 years. Another level of organization within Challenger is through the technical research working groups that really support the development of standards in methods and measurements. We've already heard here from GOOS by Gabrielle right in the beginning of the session. And Challenger will build upon early efforts and will work with the GOOS, particularly with DOOS and other decade programs, to move research closer on standards and working practices. In addition, these technical research working groups will also assess or try to assess the potential of new technologies to support deep sea science, making it more accessible either through low cost or opening up novel lines of inquiry. These technical groups are currently being established. There've been several of them that have been proposed, one on eDNA, one on specimen exploration, taxonomy, but so far only one is active, and that's the megafaunal image-based technical research working group that I invite you to join if you're interested. And we are also open to suggestions of new technical working groups. Finally, I would like to point out that although Challenger 150 was designed to respond to the UN Decade of Ocean Science, it really is a legacy program of more than 20 years of collaborative deep sea biology research that has resulted from the census of marine life and has evolved through many collaborative initiatives such as the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, and then with supports of SCORE, as I already said, we formed this working group. And finally, last year in October, we were endorsed as a UN Ocean Decade program. I won't take more of your time, so we have time for discussion. I'll just leave you with our address, our website, email, and Twitter. And as Margaret already pointed out, there'll be new calls for actions of the decade, and please contact us if you're interested in joining Challenger 150. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Well, we have many questions that were already answered in the question and answer section, but I guess if we want to keep everybody in the loop, it will be a good idea to bring them out for everybody. So the first questions were aimed for Gabrielle. Can you?
Yeah, thank you. They're all good questions, and I think these would be good questions for discussion and not, so I'll just introduce them, and then maybe if we have opportunity for discussion, that would be great. So Monica asked if we consider that these initiatives can be carried out in all parts of the world, particularly where gaps have been identified. And she was asking what actions are being carried out to narrow gaps. And I really think this speaks to the power of our coordination in the context of the decade, because we really want to have regional conversations where we understand from local communities, science and observing practitioners, what the needs and gaps are, and then we can consider a process to understand what's where priority for monitoring, what's most feasible for monitoring in order to address those gaps. And so the decade offers certainly regional fora, regional collaboration centers, but also we, those of us gathered here, many of us have a global reach and an understanding of regional partners to engage. Our organizations do, we do as individuals. And so finding ways to facilitate those conversations and to bring in those users and community representatives to help us understand the needs and co-design the science and the observations, I think that's the opportunity that the decade presents. So the answer to, Monica, your question is yes. The answer to how, or to what is being done right now, I think that's a work in progress that we all can contribute to.
If somebody has like a comment about that or anything, you can always raise your hand to participate in the discussion. Then Jake Rice, I don't know if Jake wants to bring up his question, if he's around maybe, or if not, like I can just read it. Okay. Okay, so Jake says, you comment that only 7% of ocean is systematically monitored. Agree, it is low and should increase. However, the ability to detect major signals will not increase linearly with increase in percentage cover up to 100. Do we have any idea how high the percentage coverage should be before we have a high ability to detect major signals in marine biodiversity changes early enough to respond to them fairly proactively? So I don't know if somebody else besides Gabrielle wants to answer, or Gabrielle, now that you have the answer and we have so limited time, maybe you can go right to it.
I didn't have an answer. I think that this is an important question. Am I muted? No. And so that's how I responded to Jake. So I think it would be great for some discussion around this question. I think this is the kind of thing that we can derive from some of those community conversations we've been talking about, where we, have a deeper sense of what the needs are, and then we can align that with what are some of the available technologies to address those needs, and where are there resources that allow us to kind of collect those observations or the data that's emerging as priorities that are interesting for science, but also help us to meet requirements for information for sustainable development and restoration, conservation, that sort of thing. It'd be interesting if others want to weigh in. I'm hoping that's what we can do with the time here today.
Please, if anybody has like something to weigh in, raise your hand. It can help. That can help us to locate you and give you the word. Okay.
And Ward did put a comment in the chat, which is that we won't need 100% coverage, but there are areas with high biodiversity that now lack monitoring programs, especially in developing countries. And I think that's a good point. I do see Jake's hand raised, but
yes.
Yeah.
So maybe we can give him the. Jake, can you unmute yourself?
Am I unmuted?
You are.
Thank you. I think if we could put a team together that could come up with an estimate of this. And of course, not all pieces of the ocean are equal in terms of what they'd contribute. to increasing our ability to pick up signals. But if we could make a case as a community of experts that if we could reach this level of coverage distributed vaguely this way, it would be really a valuable pitch to make to potential funders that if you could just help us reach this level of coverage, here's all the things we would be able to do far better than we can do now. I think that would be a really valuable investment of our expertise collectively if we could see some neighborhood that percent where we begin to hit that diminishing returns for even further investment. It's always hard to sell governments on marine monitoring because it can be so expensive. So this is just, it's always a weakness when we make these pitches that we don't know how much more we really need to do our job well. And I think we, exactly as Gabrielle said, we've got a lot of information we could use this way. And I'm not aware we've ever tried. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Well, I see that if you want to see a little bit more, Margaret also commented on that. I don't know, Margaret, if you want to.
Yeah, I thought it was a great point, Jake. And I think not only the amount, but also, you know, key areas that are important for observation. And, you know, you just have to look at Aaron's, the map from Aaron's paper on to see that, you know, they're just vast areas of the ocean away from continents that have very little in the way of repeat measurement. And hopefully as these techniques become used by more and are incorporated into other kinds of both synoptic programs and time series programs, that will start to fill that in. But it was a great point.
Thank you, Margaret. Gabrielle, your slide indicated Pegasus/Further Earth survey indicate 95% use SOP, but only 10% share. How can we change that?
I think, Pauline, thanks for the question. That's our collective kind of responsibility, right? In terms of encouraging groups to submit best practices to the Ocean Best Practices repository, so that there's, you know, use of that forum for sharing information about available, you know, practices. There certainly, that is something that our respective groups can talk about, is the importance of standardization, of coordinating on you know, methods for data collection and data sharing, on coordinating efforts around capacity building as well. I think it just needs to be an active part of the conversation, but maybe that's, you know, that is not sufficient. That's my initial answer. Again, do others want to weigh in? It's a great question.
Yes, please do.
I agree with Gabrielle. We have to start with among ourselves in the community and start sharing, and then that's the first step, and then we see how we move from there. But yeah, it's not easy, and Ward already pointed out in the chat that just improving the current programs that are active right now is going to be a challenge. So it's a start. It's my feeling, and I think we're doing well as a community on marine sciences.
If somebody else has a question or a comment for another of our panelists, it will be great to hear from you. I know we are already over the time, I think, with the, are we? Can you tell me, Jose or Joanna?
Yeah, a little bit over time, but no problem, you know.
Okay.
Networking Fridays are supposed to be very relaxed. So,
Well, I'm asking because I know like some of our panelists might have other commitments. I really encourage you guys to all get here, open the discussion. This is a space to do that. We want to find ways to work together.
See a question from Frank. I don't know if you want to chat about that later. Frank, don't know, Claudia, are you closing the session or?
Question for Anna. I have been wondering how deep ocean, not yet. Let's give it like 5 more minutes, please, because like I really want to see if somebody else want to.
Okay, so we, as you know, Frank, we on Challenger are working with the seabed 2030 as well, and we are, as you say, we're just building on that and what seabed 2030 is bringing forward when we are using that, especially for habitat mapping, and then build on that for observations on biodiversity. But really on the short term, we are using the data from seabed 2030 for habitat mappings.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. I guess, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Jose and Joanna. Thank you all for coming and joining us today. If you have any other questions, you can always send them directly to their panelists or through like the channels you already know. Please be in tune to see what's the next Friday, when is the next Friday, and what it is going to be about. And thank you for joining. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you,
you did a great job.
Anna, Gabrielle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the Friday.